Thank you, Dr. Kudlu. I think probably only both of us are here now. We're the last talk of the day. At the outset, I'd like to thank the scientific committee for giving me this opportunity. So, a definition of post-LASIK ectasia is it's a rare and serious complication after refractive surgery. There is a progressive steepening and thinning of the cornea. The incidence is about 1 in 2,000, and the incidence among surgeons have been reported as high as 52%. It's a progressive condition and can present anytime between 6 to 24 months, with an average of 13 months after LASIK, and it's usually characterized by visual disturbance like glare and halos. So diagnostic clues are increasing myopia, increasing cylinder, change in keratometry and topography, inferior corneal steepening, change in wavefront analysis, increase in higher order aberrations, decreased pachymetry, and loss of uncorrected visual acuity. So this is a characteristic case of post-LASIK ectasia. You can see the eccentric, inferior, and paracentral steepening with almost all the parameters being affected. So what are the risk factors? The suspicious topography is probably something which you have to look into. An asymmetric bow tie is probably one of the characteristic hallmarks of an early keratoconus. Skewing of the radial axis with the IS ratio of greater than 1.4 is another important parameter that you have to look for, screening a patient for LASIK surgery. And posterior elevation, when you look at this map, there's hardly anything wrong with this map except for an IHD, which is red. But when you look at the posterior Belen-Ambrosio, you can see the advanced state of the keratoconus in showing a high posterior elevation, which shows that the keratoconus can most often start at the posterior aspect of the cornea, and only screening the anterior portion, the sagittal maps alone, are not enough. Another important parameter that we have to look into is the residual stromal bed thickness, and several biomechanical studies have reinforced the importance of this. The stress strain analysis and cohesive tensile strength analysis have indicated that the corneal strength is significantly greater in the anterior 40% of the cornea than in the posterior 60%. Santiago et al. Found that the percentage of tissue altered after LASIK should not exceed 40%, where it's calculated the risk of ectasia increases. So the PTA is calculated that with the flap thickness, with the ablation depth divided by the central corneal thickness. The PTA greater than 40% is strongly associated with the development of ectasia in otherwise normal topography. The other important factor is that the LASIK flap does not contribute to the tensile strength of the cornea. There is a loss of structural integrity and biomechanical strength in the cornea after LASIK. It reduces the overall load-bearing tissue, shifts the load-bearing structurally to the weaker posterior stroma. However, the RSB of 250 microns as a cutoff does not absolutely discriminate between eyes that will develop ectasia and those will not. RSB seems to be a continuous variable with the risk of ectasia increasing with decreasing RSB. Age is again a very important factor. The younger the age, the more significant is the chance of patient developing ectasia. This may be partially explained by the fact that the corneal tensile strength increases with age. The other important parameters which are interrelated are the pachymetry of the cornea, the degree of myopia, and the residual stromal bed. Low CT has been found to be a risk factor in all the published studies. Thinner corneas may be an early indicator of KK, and the thinner corneas are at higher risk than lower RSB. So looking at the ectasia scoring system, it takes into consideration the residual stromal bed, the age, central corneal thickness, mean spherical equivalent, and abnormal topography. And a high myopia, which is greater than 88 diopters, has a higher risk due to the lower RSB and a deeper ablation depth. Other risk factors are eye rubbing, family history of keratoconus, refractive instability, best corrected visual acuity of less than 20/20 pre-op, and a male gender. One significant criticism of the risk score system is that any individual less than 22 years is automatically classified as a moderate risk, despite the low incidence of ectasia in this age group. Other risk factors are Down syndrome, family history of connective tissue disorders, ocular allergy, atopy, and mechanical factors such as eye rubbing and floppy eyelid syndrome. Pregnancy and hormonal changes in PCOS seem to affect the corneal biomechanics and may be an independent risk factor. So the management would consist of reassuring the patient, restoring the vision, and preventing progression. And consensus of opinion is the occurrence of ectasia per se is not a deviation from the standard of care and does not mean that the patient was a poor candidate for refractive surgery. So collagen cross-linking, I think I will not touch upon this because enough has been said by Dr. Sujata Das. And this is one of the probably post-LASIK ectasia is one of the indications for early cross-linking in these patients. It can be combined with topoguided laser. It can be combined with Intacs and also with an accelerated cross-linking. Accelerated cross-linking has been explained again by Dr. Sujata Das. But just to give you an overview, the basic idea here is to get a 5.4 joules per centimeter square, and it can be done by increasing the power and reducing the time. And the normal accelerated cross-linking that we all prefer is 10 milliwatts for 9 milliwatts for 10 minutes. That's a thing, and it's shown to be equivalent to the Dresden protocol. So topography and ablation profile to create the asymmetry of the cornea. Here you can see this is a very typical keratoconus post-LASIK ectasia, and you can see here the ablation is done not only over the cone but also creates a hyperopic ablation to make the cornea more symmetric. So these are some of my cases which have post and pre and post topoguided PRK with cross-linking. You can see the drop in the cylinder from 5.5 to 1.25, and significant drop is noted. Intacs are corneal inserts which can normalize corneal topography, causes central corneal flattening. The angle of insertion can be varied depending upon the irregular astigmatism. And like Dr. Rajesh emphasized, even single segment might be enough in these cases. And they have excellent refractive effect. These are some of the patients who have, this is one of my patients, you can see a -6, dropping to +2.5 post Intacs. And you can see the comparison maps showing an excellent response after Intacs. Other treatment options are contact lenses, Rose-K, hybrid lenses, and most importantly, the Boston lenses, which are very, very useful, particularly the many scleral lenses, which have come to the market in about 3-4 years. And this has reduced the incidence of keratoplasty after post-LASIK ectasia. So last but not the least, in patients who have not responded to any of these treatment and want better results than probably what they are getting, probably the only thing you have to go in for is keratoplasty. And today the standard of care is deep anterior lamellar keratoplasty for post-LASIK ectasia. So preventive procedure, I think one of the previous speakers spoke about LASIK extra, and where a lady, I think she went through the entire procedure. This can be done post-LASIK to prevent post-LASIK ectasia. The clinical pearls here are to monitor serial refraction, look for change in the keratoscopic Myers, look for early clues like ghosting and glare, monitor IOP, have a full armamentarium of treatment available, and most importantly, reassure the patient. Early diagnosis and appropriate management gives best results. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, MS Ravindra sir is here. Any inputs from your side, sir?
No, it's a fantastic coverage of the entire refractive surgery. There's nothing much we can add to what Dr. Sujata has already covered. And I mean, that's it. No, I have no additional comments on this.
Thank you so much, madam. Thank you for, thank you, Chairperson, Dr. Ravindra sir, Dr. Fogla, and Dr. Himanshu Mehta. Thank you, all the speakers. Sujata madam is also here for this wonderful session. This is probably the first time in AOS we started this subspecialty day. The exclusive refractive treatment subspecialty where someone wants to start the refractive surgery also. If they would have logged in at 12 o'clock and end by this time, I think definitely they'll go ahead with buying a refractive.
Krishna Prasad, your experiences you should comment, because you've been doing refractive surgery a lot. Can you comment on, summarize on all the lectures that were held today?
Yes, sir. Like of course, basic first we started with the what and all the equipment, really the investigation in equipment required, and everybody is telling, I think if you have got Pentacam, that does most of the job. Then a lot of even people spoke about Galilei, Sirius, and all. These are all additional feature. But once when you're starting, if you have Pentacam, it does most of the job. Then once if you are like picking up your practice, if you want to upgrade your practice into a presbyopic presbyopic treatment, then you need to have a aberrometer, like preferably eye trace. That is what everybody is telling, which can even pick up a lot of aberrations out of the eye. Most probably even dysfunctional lens index also it can pick up. Then about the treatment, I think up to the call, depending upon the power, of course, PRK is the gold standard. You've been talking about PRK since a quite long period. You have done a wonderful job as far as PRK is concerned.
What percentage of your practice is PRK versus femto
Smile.
versus
Yeah, my
microkeratomy.
actually 60 to 70% is smile and remaining 40% is PRK.
What about Dr. Sujata?
The 10%, 10 to 15% PRK, sir. The rest is femto. More, I hardly do standard nowadays.
Okay. What about smile? You switched over to smile?
No, sir, we have not yet got.
Fine.
So then there are like a discussion about how smile is better than femtolasic. There are a lot of studies being showed in today's talk by different speaker. Probably because of I think so many factors. I think smile have a definite edge over femtolasic, but smile doesn't have a edge over PRK because still PRK people consider to be a gold standard treatment.
In
Then
our practice, we almost for last 7-8 years we have switched over. Majority are surface. Yeah,
surface.
we call it as
Smile?
ASA.
What about your incidence of smile? How many patients do you?
Smile. We hesitated to buy the machine yet. We would like to. We switch over between the smile versus femto versus flap. We still do the flap.
Yeah.
But smile is considered as, I mean, I'm glad that increasingly, as Dr. Krishna Prasad also has mentioned, it increasingly it's becoming more and more. And it's possible with titration, with explanation to the patients. First 2 days is what patient has to, get used to, mentally be prepared for that. But then results with our, we have done a lot of experiments, a lot of innovations in surface ablations. And that's my first priority.
My one thing about surface ablation, I would not ablate beyond 10 diopters, sir. I would rather switch for a phakic IOL or something like that.
Yeah, that's acceptable. Most of them, see, if you look at the spectrum, most of the time we are operating between 3 to 6. I mean, up to 6, 7, it's very comfortable.
Yeah, even Dr. Today Praveen Krishna also had a full experience about his PRK patients also. He explained very well. Then later on, I think we had a discussion about the phakic lenses, about all different variety. Then later on, I think you are also there part of this.
One question I had was, if time is there, I do not know, which is the best viscoelastic for phakic IOL? You must be doing a lot of IOL and IPCLs. You would have tested, you can go and commit on which is the best.
I still put a dispersive whisker.
Which one?
Dispersive whisker.
Dispersive. Okay.
I also put dispersive, sir.
Okay.
I also put, though there some of them, I think Sri Ganesh is using cohesive. I used it in a couple of cases and I felt that the pressure was high. But whereas with dispersive, I've not had any problems.
Okay. Do you use any anti-glaucoma drops? See,
No.
somebody nicely said don't use pilocarpine. I never use pilocarpine for these patients.
I even never use pilocarpine because of post-op. Lot of reaction will be there with the pilocarpine. But
cornea is clear.
Yes.
IOP is fine.
Yes.
I'm very happy with dispersive viscoelastic.
No, I use dispersive, but then talking to people, I was looking at should I change over to cohesive, but then
I was hearing Sri Ganesh. I did for 2 cases. Not very happy.
Okay, good that I raised this question.